join my colleagues in thanking all of you for your terrific service to our country in many different capacities. Mr. Bowles, thank you for recognizing that actions the Congress has already taken to date, including passage of the Budget Control Act, has already achieved projected savings of close to $1 trillion in discretionary funds, which isn't far from the targets that all of you set in your work. The major difference being you actually had a higher part of that coming from defense cuts. Is that not the case?
We actually divided ours between security and non-security.
Right. And so you were at about $1.2 trillion in discretionary. Half of that is $600 billion. I think the figures will show that your proposals took more than has been taken to date from the defense side of the equation. But I think many of us view your general approaches here as balanced approaches, balanced frameworks. So I want to put the discretionary piece to the side for a minute, because we've come close to achieving, in some cases overachieving your targets. In Simpson-Bowles, as you mentioned, Mr. Bowles, you had about $500 billion gross cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. You actually took some savings out of that. Net, it was around $400 billion. But on the revenue, I just want people to understand, because what you had in both your plans was genuine, what us budget geeks call genuine CBO, Joint Tax Committee scorable revenue. And as you mentioned, Mr. Bowles, your baseline assumed, as part of your deficit projections, that we would have about $800 billion, which is equivalent to about the amount of money that would be generated from allowing the rates for the folks at the very top to lapse, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
That's right. And then on top of that, you had proposals through tax reform and the other things you've talked about to generate another about $1.2 trillion. Isn't that right?
Right. That's exactly right.
All right. And so for, again, on the Budget Committee, when we're comparing that to what we call the current policy baselines, compared to CBO, that's about a $2.2 trillion tax cut compared to current law. Of course, it's revenue increase compared to current law. It's a tax break. And looking at your testimony, Dr. Rivlin and Senator Domenici, you come in about the same place, $2.2 trillion on a current law baseline, correct? All right.
Right.
So let me just ask one other question with respect to tax reform. I take it from looking at both your reports that you would want tax reform to be done in a way that maintains at least the current progressivity of the tax code. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We worked very hard to do that in ours.
Thank you.
Ours is actually slightly more progressive than the current.
So at least the current progressivity of the tax code. Now, you've both in your written testimony suggested we may want to do two-step processes, and down payment and then something else. Dr. Rivlin, Senator Domenici, you specifically say as part of that down payment you would include about $450 billion of what you call tax expenditure savings. I assume, therefore, that you see that as something you could do for deficit reduction purposes, not necessarily at the same time as tax reform. And I think if I look at the ones you've picked out, you think that they could be what we call rifle shots. Is that right?
Right, but it should be consistent with our notion is you have a tax reform idea.
Yes.
You move some of it forward.
That's right. But you'd have, and again, on net, your tax reform ideas would generate $2.2 trillion on a current policy baseline, correct?
Right.
Okay. Let me talk a minute about jobs in the economy, because the Congressional Budget Office has said that about a little over 1/3 of our current deficit today is as a result of the fact that we have a very weak economy. We're not operating at full potential. So I think all of us agree that we need to get the economy moving again. Dr. Rivlin, you pointed out that your plan with Senator Domenici. Senator Domenici had about $680 billion in payroll tax relief, and I think you said the other day on one of the Sunday shows you would, quote, go bigger than the President's job plan. Do you believe that something like that is necessary at this time?
Yes, I think we're in danger of slipping into stagnation, and we should do something about it.
Mr. Bowles, would you agree that it would be a bad idea this coming year to have every working American see an increase in their payroll tax relative to last year?
Yeah, on the payroll tax that was in the President's proposal, I think it was about $240 billion out of a $447 billion.
That's right.
And it's hard for me as a fiscal conservative to say this, but I could support a continuation of the payroll tax deduction for, for another year for employees. It's very hard for me to understand how an approximately $600 deduction for the employer on a temporary basis is going to be enough to get them to hire a full-time, permanent $30,000 a year employee. Okay. So I don't think I would support the payroll tax deduction for the employer. I could see supporting it for the employee if we could pay for it.
Okay. Thank you. Just
could I say yes. On our end, I'm for what we told you we're for, but I wouldn't argue if you followed his suggestion. As I see it, it's still alive, and what he's talking about is certainly better than nothing.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Domenici. On health care, and Dr. Rivlin, you've testified many times in front of the Budget Committee and stated that you thought that the Affordable Care Act introduced a number of very important innovations. I agree with you that we need to do more in terms of modernizing the Medicare system to focus more on the value of care and the quantity of care versus the quantity of care. I do have a question with respect to your version of the premium support plan, the most recent one. And that is, if you are confident in the market forces driving down the prices, and if your argument is that Medicare is driving those market forces, then why would you need a fail-safe mechanism? In other words, why would you need to say, if you don't achieve the goal we want in savings, you have to have GDP +1, and if it's not keeping track with the market, isn't that just a cost transfer to Medicare beneficiaries?
Well, I think I'm not absolutely certain that how the markets will work. We have seen, even in the limited market that is Medicare Advantage, that in some places they work well and come in under the fee-for-service, and in other places they don't. We think this is a much more robust plan than Medicare Advantage. But the reason you want the fail-safe is so the Congress will absolutely know what they're going to spend going forward on Medicare. It's not going to be more, it's not going to grow faster than this. It's a defined contribution. And we think that's very useful. And as for the cost shifting, if there might be some cost shifting, but then you could arrange it so that it is not cost shifting onto lower income people. It is means tested, as we were saying before. It's cost shifting onto people who can better afford it.
Right. Well, I think that, again, I mean, if we're confident that the market forces were going to work the way intended, then I don't think there'd be a need for a backup. I do know that members of Congress and folks who are on the Federal Employees Health Benefit Plan, for example, they bid, different plans bid, and there's a defined support mechanism that's set in law, 72%, 28%. So I'm not sure why we would be proposing something different for Medicare beneficiaries. Let me just close, Mr. Chairman, by saying we asked actually CBO to take a look at some of these ideas, including one where we just had competition among the managed care plans, and another one where we threw in the wrinkle of premium support. It wasn't the second lowest bidder. It was more along the lines of what some other, the Bro plan did, which is just market places. And just having competition among the managed care plans, they said, came out a score of about $9 billion between 2014 2021. Adding in this other mechanism achieved about, it took you up to a total of about $25 billion. So it's pretty clear, at least from these numbers, and we can take a look at them, that we're going to need to do other things, that this is not a panacea, at least according to CBO's numbers, for dealing with the Medicare challenge, that we need to look